Where are we on CCS today? What are the most important CCS projects on the radar? And why can this help the world save itself? We asked Trude Sundset, CEO of Gassnova, to share her reflections. Trude Sundset, welcome to ONS Digital 2020. It's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Today we're going to talk about carbon capture and storage, CCS as you call it. I want to start with kind of the broad questions. Where are we on CCS today? And maybe you could say something about Norway and a little bit more on the international markets.
Yes, I can. We have a lot of assessment from IEA and from IPCC, the UN Panel on Climate Change, telling us that CCS is absolutely necessary in order to meet the Paris Agreement goals. But we still have a long way to go. It's new technology and the financing is challenging, so we haven't really seen the development that we would like to see. But we now see an increased interest. Many countries and many industries now see that this needs to be part of the solution. And therefore, we have worked much more specifically on how to deal with this. And we think that maybe with help from Norway, that we can see maybe a breakthrough for CCS deployment worldwide.
And you speak about solutions. CCS is an important part of the European plan on how to deliver on the climate change. How do you think Norway can take advantage of great ambitions in Europe?
Well, Norway has a lot of experience in CO2 capture and storage since we have done it in the North Sea for the past 23, 24 years. We have the Sleipner project and we have the Snøhvit project. So in fact, Norway is in the lead of this technology and particularly on showing how you can do this with geologic storage in the North Sea. So what we're trying to do in Norway now is with a lot of effort in research and in testing of new technologies that we do at the Technology Center at Mongstad, and with our full-scale industrial implementation, we are trying to actually develop an infrastructure that the rest of Europe can make use of in the future, just in a few years, hopefully.
And building, I mean, you mentioned that financial challenges could be a topic. Do you see a Europe which is not only willing to set the ambition, but is also willing to invest and make it happen on CCS?
Yes, we do believe that's possible. It is not easy because if you compare with renewables, CO2 capture and storage is removing an emission challenge. So you're selling the same product, you're just selling it with reduced or minimized or maybe zero emissions. So you have to create a new market. And the price of emitting CO2 is not sufficiently high today in order to make this happen. That is why we need support from governments and from EU and also from the industry themselves. In the future, we believe that the cost of the technology will come down at the same time as the price of emitting CO2 will be higher. And somewhere in the future this will be an ordinary business for industries meeting the future demands of not emitting CO2 at the same time as producing their products as they do today.
I hear you talk about the kind of the carbon pricing. Are you optimistic that we can get into a market which have the right incentives when it comes to the higher prices of emitting CO2? Are you optimistic how we can go to solve it?
Yes, I am actually very optimistic, and we do see an increased interest in CO2 capture and storage, and we do see more reality into the plans that the countries and industries are making. But it is going to take time. So we're talking about 2050, and that is 30 years from now. So the question is, when do we start? We need to get started and we need to drive the costs down. Then you need to create a market to begin with. And then also we need firm policies so that it will cost more to emit CO2. That is the basis for the politics in the Paris Agreement. But it is challenging to get started and to start the ball rolling. And I'm very proud that Norway has the willingness to take a lead on this. I think that's very important. But I think also that can be an advantage for Norway because we have the skills, the experience, we know how to do it, and we have the courage to try to invest in an infrastructure that others can make use of. And it is a bit special because you are capturing CO2 from the industries that emit this CO2, and then you're putting this into a transportation and storage facility. And by taking a special responsibility for the transportation and storage part, it will be so much easier to find the right incentives and to find the business models for industries that are emitters of CO2.
But you talk about policy changes and in order to move things forward, but who really needs to do what to push the CCS development further?
Well, that's quite a complex question. We need to have a lot of things happen at the same time. We need the industry to be engaged. They have to see that they need to solve their emission problems. We need the policy to be in place so that it's a high enough price on emitting CO2, and the incentives needs to be there. And we need also support from governments in the period of time until it is sufficiently expensive to emit CO2. And then we also need to continue doing research and development to drive the costs of the technology down. But I think that once you have established a market and the technology providers see that this market is going to happen, they will also push their technologies forward. You'll have competition between the technology providers, and you'll see a similar cost reduction development that you have seen in, for instance, solar and wind, renewable energy. The same cost development you need to see also in CO2 capture and storage.
You mentioned research and technology development, but is technology really the big challenge, or is it more of value chain collaboration between different parties and commercial elements that really is a big challenge?
Yeah, the biggest challenge for CCS today is currently not the technology itself. We know how to do it. We have the technology ready. It's commercially available. The challenge is on financing it and the business model, as well as also the regulatory side of things. Everything can be solved, but the big challenge is the business model. But although we have the technology today, we need to see technology development so that the costs will come down. I believe we will see the same, if we are successful, we'll see the same development as we have seen in solar and wind. Not directly comparable, but you'll see a cost development. But with the non-existing market today, we have the technology, but it's not the optimal technology. And we need a whole portfolio of technology, because this is not just one business model. It's a different business model, whether you remove CO2 from natural gas production or from a cement factory or a waste incinerator. So you need a portfolio of technology development, more technology providers, a bigger market, and with the right incentives, you'll see the costs coming down.
Sometimes things are easier to understand if we look at examples. And you in Gassnova, you're involved with some really interesting CCS projects here in Norway connected to different businesses. Could you share some highlights from those projects and what we can expect?
Certainly. We are working with Heidelberg Cement, the Norcem plant in Brevik, where you produce cement, and then the plan is to capture 400,000 tons of CO2 every year. And we're working with Fortum Oslo Varme's waste incinerator in Oslo, where we also plan to capture the same amount, 400,000 tons of CO2 every year. We will collect that CO2 and transport it by ship to an intermediate store on the west coast of Norway. The plan is to construct a pipeline and to inject the CO2 in so-called saline aquifer. It's a geologic store 3,000 meters below the sea floor. And all of this needs to come together at the same time in this project. And we're still right now waiting for the investment decision in order to make this happen in the next 3 to 4 years, hopefully.
And so parts of the project, they've been called the Northern Light projects as well, together with Equinor and Shell and Total being the big IOCs coming in. And
Yes.
what I find really interesting is that you really try to solve huge industrial challenges. At the same time, you participate to solve the climate change. But on the end of it, there is actually a potential to really change the business model of natural gas producing into hydrogen. How dramatic changes do you think this will have an international scale if we succeed?
Well, it is easy to be thinking big visions here, and potentially can be very big. But I think we need to take one step at a time. And we are so fortunate in Norway that we have the offshore industry, as you mentioned, the Northern Lights Consortium, where you have Equinor, Shell, and Total. All of these companies have experience in doing CO2 storage. And that is very important because we need to make sure that other countries like Germany, for instance, need to trust that if they send their CO2 to Norway, it will be safely stored, and that we have the experience there is key. So this is also a part of transforming the oil and gas business and the knowledge that so many people have in that industry into the future businesses like doing CO2 storage, but also to convert, for instance, natural gas to hydrogen and then to store the CO2. So a combination of hydrogen production and CCS, I think it's a very exciting business model. And I'm not sure how soon it will be big, but I feel quite confident that it could be a very big business opportunity for the future. And we see these companies already involved in several hydrogen projects where they are assuming that will have the CO2 storage infrastructure in place. So it's a prerequisite in order to succeed with hydrogen from fossil fuels.
I hear you're seeking willingness both from industry and from governments in order to really make CCS happen, not too far ahead. I hear you talking about the Norway who can really use their technology and experience to not fix the climate problem itself, but actually help the world fix itself. You're optimistic on CCS, and Trude, I really want to thank you for joining this ONS Digital program. It was a great pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.